My name is Marin Cole, and my quiet Sunday ritual is the closest thing to peace. Sunlight on the table, the kettle humming, the lace curtain breathing. Then the mail slot clicks, and a cream envelope lands. Gold wax. Heavy paper. I smile before I think. Because weddings mean good news. Derek Lawson looks up too fast. A half second I notice. I break the seal, and the letters glow, like a verdict. You are invited to the wedding of Isabel Hart and Michael Turner. The room shrinks and Derek's face drains. Isabel Hart is the woman who nearly split our marriage. My hands stay steady. The air doesn't. Derek says he had no idea she was getting married. But his eyes keep score. Years of reading money trails taught me how to read a man. Forgiveness taught me silence. Not blindness. The invitation sits between us like evidence. I slip the card into my purse and finish my tea. I will attend that wedding. Not for spectacle, but for clarity. The past thinks it can walk in dressed as coincidence. Today it finds the door locked. Derek whispers that I should let it go. That there is nothing to gain. I meet his stare and let the quiet do the work. I am done protecting what broke me. Do not tell me where to stand in my own story. That night I opened my laptop. The screen's glow spilling across the kitchen table where the invitation still sat. I logged into our joint account. Scrolling through months of transactions. Line by line. The way I used to trace confessions in spreadsheets. Patterns reveal truth long before words ever do. Then I saw it an ACH transfer of $42,000 labeled as a venue deposit. The recipient's name hit me harder than the number. Heart and Stone Wellness, LLC. Isabel's company. The same one she had bragged about starting back when she and Derek were still exchanging excuses. I leaned back in my chair. Heart steady. Mind sharper than ever. He hadn't just stayed in touch, he'd been funding her. I cross-checked the filing address through the state's business registry. It matched an old apartment building near downtown. The one Isabel once rented. Every breadcrumb led home to her. I called Avery Park, my closest friend and attorney, and asked her a single question. What happens when a spouse hides financial transfers tied to infidelity? Her voice came calm. Certain marital fraud can void every right he thinks he still owns. When I hung up, I saved the screenshots. Every line of proof marked and stored. My hand brushed over the gold-sealed invitation again. Derek believed the past had buried itself quietly. He forgot that I work in compliance. And the dead always leave a paper trail. I would attend that wedding. Not as a guest. As an auditor of truth. I spent the next morning combing through digital dust. The CSV file opened like a confession. Rows of transactions. Dates. Merchant code. And just enough sloppiness to expose intent. Derek's pattern was rhythmic Friday nights at upscale bars. Then early Monday transfers to Heart and Stone Wellness LLC. The kind of cycle that hides behind routine until someone like me decides to read it out loud. Each descriptor told a story. The ACH IDs matched a merchant processor tied to a wellness studio lease on Madison Avenue. The same address listed on Isabel's state filing. I checked the lease deposit records through a public property document portal, cross-referencing the transfer timestamps with the payment confirmation. There it was again, $18,000 paid from Derek's secondary card, labeled as a build-out fee. He had practically financed her storefront. Then came the email he didn't mean to forward. A construction invoice sent to our shared inbox by mistake. Subject line: Reading Heart and Stone Build-Out. Final phase. I clicked the header and saw his signature buried in the chain. Approving the release of funds. My pulse didn't spike. It steadied. Proof replaces emotion. It becomes its own kind of oxygen. I called Noah Bell, my compliance colleague, and asked for an off-record confirmation. Using internal access, he verified the logins from Derek's home IP address, aligning exactly with the transaction times. It was textbook self-incrimination dressed as marital negligence. Every screen capture, every timestamp, every linked descriptor became another nail sealing the truth. When I finished organizing the evidence, I printed each document, laid them across the table, and stared at the web I'd reconstructed. The trail wasn't just about money, it was about loyalty. Rerouted and renamed as business expense. Derek didn't realize he'd trained me too well. I used to audit strangers. Now I was auditing my own marriage. And the numbers told the story he never would. Avery reviewed every document I sent and called back within the hour. Her voice was calm. Surgical. The way she always sounded before she took someone apart in court. She drafted a formal demand for Derek to disclose any marital funds transferred without consent. It wasn't an accusation yet. Just a polite reminder that silence carries legal consequences. We met the next morning in her office. Walls lined with case files that smelled faintly of ink and certainty. Avery slid a copy of our prenuptial clause across the table. The one Derek never thought I'd read again. It clearly stated that any misrepresentation of shared assets invalidated his entitlement to joint property. In simple terms, if he lied, he lost. From there, I checked our home equity line of credit. A withdrawal of $27,000 appeared the same week the venue deposit cleared for Isabel's wedding. The transfer passed through a corporate vendor linked to a luxury events chain. The same one managed by Caleb Rivera. I followed the money and found it looping back into Isabel's circle like a snake swallowing its own tail. I contacted the venue's compliance office directly, requesting verification under the fraudulent or deceptive payment clause. The chain belonged to a real estate investment trust, which meant every transaction was subject to audit. I sent them my documentation, noting the potential conflict between payer and beneficiary. The response came swiftly. They would investigate. And if verified, the venue had full rights to suspend services. That night, Derek came home, humming as if the world was intact. I plated dinner, poured his wine, and smiled when he said he was glad we'd moved past the old drama. He didn't notice the printed envelope from Avery tucked beneath my planner. I told him we'd attend the wedding. My tone was even almost gentle. He believed it was forgiveness. It was notice of intent. The morning of the wedding felt unnaturally still, like the air was waiting to see who would break first. Derek drove in silence, adjusting his cufflinks the way guilty men adjust their nerves. I watched the countryside slide by, the fields blurring into gold and green, and thought how strange peace can feel right before impact. When we arrived, the venue gleamed white flowers, polished chandeliers, and a faint scent of something expensive trying to hide decay. I stepped out of the car in a black satin dress that caught the sunlight like a blade. Heads turned as we entered the courtyard, whispers following in small, curious ripples. Derek's hand trembled when he reached for mine, and I let him hold it, just long enough for the photographers to believe in a happy marriage. When he leaned close and whispered not to make a scene, I smiled the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. Inside, the ceremony unfolded like a perfectly staged illusion. Isabel Hart appeared at the end of the aisle, radiant in lace and gold light, the picture of redemption she had always craved. Her gaze swept the crowd but never found me, though I knew she could feel it, the quiet presence of unfinished business. Derek's breath hitched beside me, that old ache flashing across his face before he remembered to hide it. When the vows began, I didn't hear a word. I only watched their hands, the trembling, the pretending, the fragile choreography of liars performing for grace. When the officiant announced their first kiss, I joined the applause, slow and deliberate. My heart didn't break. It documented. The reception began with laughter that sounded borrowed, too polished to be real. Glasses clinked, strings played softly, and the room swayed in champagne light. When the host invited guests to offer a toast, I felt my body rise before my mind caught up. The crowd turned, the microphone warm in my hand, and every eye followed the calm woman in black. Love, I began, is a curious accountant. It keeps perfect records, even when we try to delete them. A few people laughed politely, unaware of the edge hiding in my tone. It starts pure, but sometimes it gets messy, numbers misplaced, debts ignored, promises misfiled. I paused, letting the quiet grow teeth. I turned toward Derek, whose smile had already died. And yet, every transaction finds its way home, I said evenly. Like 3 payments, $42,000. 1,800美元. And $27,000 that built something beautiful for someone else. The silence that followed felt physical, heavy enough to shift the air. Glass stems trembled in midair. Isabel froze mid-laugh, her new husband's brow furrowing in confusion. I lifted my glass and smiled, calm as winter. So here's to new beginnings. I finished softly. May they rest on foundations strong enough to bear the truth. A few claps sputtered out before dissolving into whispers. Derek's hand clenched. Isabel's color drained, and the crowd tried to decide if they had just witnessed grace or the first crack of revelation. The silence that followed my toast rippled through the room like a slow quake. Caleb Rivera, the groom and venue manager, leaned toward one of his staff, his expression tightening as he whispered something urgent. A minute later, the head of event operations appeared by the stage. Holding a folder I recognized immediately. It was the compliance packet I had sent 2 days earlier. He cleared his throat and addressed the crowd, his professionalism straining under the weight of the moment. Due to a pending verification of payment sources, he announced, the venue must temporarily suspend all services until the issue is resolved. The sound that followed wasn't gasping, it was a collective intake of disbelief. The violinist stopped mid-note, and even the chandeliers seemed to hum with tension. Derek's chair scraped against the floor as he stood, muttering something about a mistake. Isabel's fingers dug into her bouquet, knuckles white. Caleb opened the folder, scanning the printouts of the financial transactions. I'd supplied proof that the wedding deposit was funded through Heart and Stone Wellness LLC, her own company. His jaw set with quiet fury. He turned to Isabel, confusion turning to comprehension. Can you explain this? He asked. Voice low but cutting through the silence. She couldn't. Her silence became the answer everyone in the room understood. And that was when the celebration truly stopped. They moved us into a private room off the main hall, a space meant for staff breaks now heavy with silence. Caleb closed the door and laid the folder on the table, his composure slipping just enough to show betrayal. I sat opposite Isabel and Derek, the two architects of this disaster, and began arranging my documents one by one. The air smelled of roses and panic. I spread out the evidence carefully: bank transfers, lease agreements, ACH records, all marked with timestamps. Caleb leaned closer, tracing the signatures with disbelief as Avery joined by speakerphone. Her voice came through steady, legal, unshakable. She recited the marital clause from my prenuptial agreement, the one Derek had signed years ago. Fraudulent concealment of assets, she said, constitutes forfeiture of shared property rights. Isabel tried to speak, but her words fell apart before they reached meaning. The email header with Derek's approval line sat between us like a loaded weapon. Caleb's face darkened as he realized part of the venue payment had come from a business account owned by his new wife. That made it a conflict under his company's ethics policy, something he could never have overlooked. He looked at her as though seeing a stranger in a stolen dress. Derek's voice cracked when he finally spoke. A weak attempt at damage control that fooled no one. I stayed silent, letting the documents do the talking. letting the truth breathe. Isabel slammed her palm against the table and called me vindictive. I smiled faintly. I'm not vindictive. I said. I'm thorough. Caleb exhaled. Long and tired. The wedding can be postponed. He murmured. But trust doesn't survive this. His words landed like a verdict. Neither of them could appeal. The announcement came swiftly after Caleb's quiet verdict. The venue's legal representative entered the room. Her tone formal and cold, confirming that all services were now suspended under the fraudulent payment clause. Staff began discreetly clearing champagne flutes and floral arrangements. Their movements deliberate, respectful, final. Word spread fast through the guests outside. What began as a celebration was now a scandal unfolding in real time. Derek stood rigid, his tie undone, face pale and damp with humiliation. I watched him search for a foothold in a collapsing story, his lips forming apologies that dissolved before they reached sound. Avery's assistant delivered the prepared civil notice via email, outlining the marital fraud and misuse of joint assets. Isabel stared at the screen as her name appeared beside Derek's on the liability claim. Caleb reviewed the documents with the weary precision of a man forced to dismantle his own happiness. He handed the folder back and said nothing more. Truth had already spoken. Isabel tried to reach for him, but he stepped away, leaving her touch suspended in air. The faint sound of guests whispering outside filtered through the closed door, a chorus of disbelief that felt almost like applause. I gathered my papers, steady hands against the chaos. The documents didn't tremble, and neither did I. Justice, when it finally arrives, doesn't shout it, signs. And as I placed the final page into its envelope, I knew this wasn't revenge anymore. It was closure, executed to the letter. That night I walked out of the hotel without looking back. The air was cool and clean, washing away the static that had clung to me for years. I slipped off my wedding ring and felt the small circle of metal grow lighter in my palm. Freedom doesn't arrive with noise. It arrives in quiet steps that no one else hears. The headlines would twist the story by morning. I knew that much. Some would call it ruthless to expose them on their wedding day. Others would say it was justice long overdue. Maybe both were true. Forgiveness has its limits, and mine expired the moment our shared money built another woman's altar. In the weeks that followed, I filed for divorce and moved into a small apartment overlooking the river. The silence there wasn't loneliness, it was recovery. Caleb canceled his wedding contract and initiated an internal audit of every transaction linked to Isabel's company. For once, the consequences were fair. I started writing again, channeling every bruise of memory into pages that felt alive. The story wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclamation. People online argued about me, about whether I went too far. But those arguments only proved the point. Truth always offends the comfortable. One evening, Derek texted a single line. I miss you. I stared at it for a long moment before typing one word. No. I set the phone down and watched the sunset fold over the city. There was no triumph, no bitterness, just a steady peace. For the first time, my life no longer needed his name to feel complete. Derek Lawson lost his position within months, his company citing financial misconduct and breach of ethics. The divorce settlement enforced Avery's clause, leaving him with nothing but his name and the silence he once demanded from me. Isabel Hart's wellness company folded after the audit, her lease terminated for fraudulent payments, her reputation collapsing under the same luxury facade she'd built. Caleb Rivera recovered the venue's reputation, but not his trust. He now reads every contract twice before shaking a hand. As for me, I finished my certification as a private compliance consultant, helping other women trace the truth inside their own ledgers. My work is quiet, deliberate, and honest, the opposite of the life I left behind. I no longer chase forgiveness or closure. I collect facts, and I let them speak. Derek once told me I'd never move on without him. He was half right. I didn't move on. I moved higher. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.